Ever found yourself, really going back and forth on that whole joint versus separate bank accounts thing? It's a biggie, one that a lot of couples grapple with. And we actually came across this podcast, had some super interesting perspectives on it. Thought we'd dive in and see what you think.
Yeah, what I found really interesting was how it goes way beyond just like the mechanics of managing money. It gets into these deeper questions about partnership, individuality, all that good stuff.
Totally. Like right out the gate, the podcast jumps into the upsides of joint accounts. And one thing they highlighted was just how much simpler it makes sharing expenses.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Streamlines things big time. Rent, groceries, utilities, all that jazz.
Right.
Having that shared pool, way easier.
Mhm.
But they go beyond just like the convenience factor.
Yeah.
They actually brought up studies showing that couples with joint accounts, a lot of times they report being happier with their finances overall.
See, now that's what I found really interesting. But it makes you wonder, right? Is it really the joint account that's making them happier? Or is it more like couples who are already on the same page about money, are they just naturally drawn to joint accounts?
The age-old question, correlation versus causation, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's probably a bit of both. Like, yeah, pooling your money, you can definitely create that feeling of shared goals, teamwork,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'd bet it's way more powerful if you're already good at talking about money as a couple.
Makes total sense. But, and they touched on this too, not everyone's the same, right? Some people really value their financial independence, and the podcast talked about that whole side of things too, those arguments for separate accounts.
Right, and for good reason.
Okay.
They had this one story from a listener talking about how much they loved surprising their partner with a gift. With separate accounts, boom, that surprise is still there. Shared statement. Might spoil the fun a little, haha. But it just shows you, separate accounts, they can really help you keep that sense of autonomy. And for some people, that's huge.
Such a good point. So then, is there like a happy medium? Because they also talked about this hybrid approach.
Okay, so this is where it gets really cool. It's like the best of both worlds, honestly. Separate accounts for your own personal spending, so you still got that independence. But then you've got the joint account specifically for shared expenses. Pretty neat, huh?
Sounds kind of ideal when you put it like that.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, that takes some serious communication, right? And organization.
Oh, 100%. The key here is like crystal clear communication,
Yeah.
How much is each person contributing to that joint account? What exactly is it covering? What happens if one person goes a little overboard with their personal spending? Got to talk about that stuff up front. The podcast, they gave some examples of couples who make this work for them, but they stress that, yeah, you got to lay down the ground rules early on and be open to adjusting them as life changes.
Makes a ton of sense. So no matter what system you're vibing with, it all comes back to communication, doesn't it? That's got to be the foundation for a healthy financial relationship.
Preach. Being open and honest about your money values, your goals, heck, even your fears around money. It's crucial. They actually suggested having like regular money dates. Sounds kind of cheesy, but I love it. Setting aside dedicated time to just talk finances as a couple.
You know what? That's actually a really good takeaway. We've been really digging into the nuts and bolts of how couples can set up their bank accounts. But at the end of the day, isn't it more about the communication itself? Like, if you had to give couples advice on how to start those conversations, especially when you're just starting out, what would you say? Something to think about as you navigate this whole money thing, right?
Because it's a biggie.